The Stirling was designed by Short Brothers in response to Air Ministry Specification B.12.36, which had been issued due to a significant increase in the size of the German Luftwaffe. The specification called for a 4-engine heavy bomber that could carry 14,000 pounds of bombs over a distance of 3,000 miles. Thus, the short Stirling was always designed from the outset as a 4-engine bomber, unlike its counterparts the Halifax and the Lancaster. The new design was required to carry either 2,000-pound armor-piercing bombs or 500-pound bombs, have the ability to carry 24 troops, and the wingspan could not exceed 100 feet. Many sources claim that the original specification limited the wingspan of the Stirling to no longer than 100 feet so that it could fit into pre-existing RAF hangars. However, this seems to be a myth, with other sources claiming that this limitation, while included within the specification, was not to fit into RAF hangars. It is possible that the limitation was imposed by the Air Ministry to simply keep aircraft designs from becoming too big. Either way, whatever the reason was, the wingspan of the Stirling could not exceed 100 feet. These specifications would significantly hinder the Stirling throughout its career. As a result of only originally having to carry a max of 2,000-pound bombs, later in the war, the design of the Stirling's bomb bay was unable to carry the larger bombs developed by Bomber Command, such as the Grand Slam. The bomb bay was split into 3 parallel cells that limited the size of the bomb that could fit into each section. Secondly, the 100 feet wingspan limitation meant that the wings did not have the lifting capabilities to fly a fully loaded Stirling to higher altitudes, and was unable to attain the operating level of 20,000 feet. The requirement to carry troops also led to the fuselage of the Stirling to be dotted with windows. The Air Ministry initially took interest in both designs submitted by Supermarine and Short Brothers, and 2 prototypes were ordered of each. As it would turn out, the Supermarine Type 317 would never fly, as Supermarine got caught up in production of fighter aircraft. The Short Brothers were used to producing flying boats, and the short Stirling was the first designed by Short Brothers to contain a retractable undercarriage, and to ensure the soundness of the design, a half-scale wooden mock-up was created. This half-scale mock-up, designated S-31, flew for the first time in September 1938 with Short Brothers Chief Test Pilot John Lancaster Parker at the controls. He found the concept to be satisfactory. When handed over to the Armament Experimental Establishment at Martlesham Heath in October, the only suggestion was that takeoff performance needed to be improved. Specifically, it was found that the takeoff run was excessively long. The undercarriage legs were extended, increasing the angle of attack of the wings on takeoff and shortening takeoff and landing runs. However, this extension made the Stirling sit at nearly 7 meters high, and this caused numerous incidents throughout the war. Another increase in the Luftwaffe led to the production orders being placed before the prototype had even flown. Then, after the Munich crisis of 1939, the Ministry of Aircraft Production initiated Plan L, and the original order of 100 was increased to 1,500. The first full-scale prototype, powered by Bristol Hercules 2 engines, took to the air on the 14th of May 1939, becoming the first of the RAF's 4-engine bombers to fly. The first flight was marred when on landing, a brake locked and the aircraft crashed and was completely written off. This significantly delayed the program as the undercarriage was redesigned and strengthened. Then, the second prototype took to the air on the 3rd of December 1939. However, on takeoff, it suffered an engine failure. Initial production versions were powered by the Bristol Hercules 11 engines. To begin with, armament consisted of a nose turret with twin 303 machine guns, a rear turret with 4 303 machine guns, and a retractable ventral position with twin 303 machine guns. However, this ventral position was quickly removed as it had poor visibility, lowered the top speed by 10 miles per hour, and when taxiing, sometimes dropped out. Thus, only very early production models were fitted with it. It was replaced with a side-mounted machine gun on either side of the rear fuselage. However, this also seems to have been removed quickly and replaced with a dorsal turret with twin 303 machine guns. A nose turret, dorsal turret, and rear turret would be standard armament across bombing versions of the Stirling. The Stirling was operated by a crew of 7 that included the pilot, co-pilot, navigator/bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer, rear gunner, and dorsal gunner. Another interesting feature of the Stirling that was unpopular and did cause some issues was the hydraulic throttle controls. The issue with this design was that there was lag between input by the pilot and the engines reacting to the input. Production was delayed due to the Battle of Britain, as fighters were prioritised over bombers. Furthermore, raids by the Luftwaffe on factories at Belfast and Rochester in August 1940 destroyed several Stirlings on the production line. The short Stirling started arriving at frontline units in August 1940, equipping No. 7 Squadron at RAF Leeming. It was the first 4-engine monoplane bomber to enter RAF service. There was a 4-month build-up period with pilots learning their new machine. A few issues arose during the takeoff phase, including having to manage the lag caused by the throttle, as well as the tendency of the Stirling to swing if the throttle was not handled carefully. However, it was said once airborne, it had fine handling qualities. The Stirling made its combat debut with No. 7 Squadron on the night of February 10th, 11th, 1941, when 3 aircraft dropped 56 500-pound bombs on oil storages near Rotterdam. In April, attacked Berlin for the first time, and in 1942 participated in all of the 1,000 bomber raids. By the end of 1941, more than 150 Stirlings had been produced. In 1941, plans were also drawn up with Canadian factories to produce the Stirling, and a contract of 140 was made. This was later cancelled and all plans scrapped. This would have been the Stirling Mk.II, powered by the 1600 horsepower Wright Cyclone R2600 engines, and 2 prototypes were made from converted Mark Is, and 3 production versions completed. There were worries within Britain that Hercules engine supplies would be limited. However, supply was always sufficient, and thus the Wright Cyclone was never adopted by the British. In combat, the Stirling proved to be very manoeuvrable and was popular with pilots. Due to its short wingspan, it could supposedly outturn Junkers Ju-88 and Messerschmitt Me-110 night fighters, and was nicknamed the fighter bomber. It could also sustain significant damage, as seen in June 1942, when a Stirling of No. 218 Squadron survived attacks from 4 German night fighters. It was heavily battered but returned to base safely after destroying 3 of the aircraft. However, on combined operations with Lancasters and Halifaxes, as the Stirling couldn't reach as high as the other 2, they were left more vulnerable to flak and fighters. It is also important to mention that 2 Stirling pilots won the Victoria Cross. Flight Sergeant R.H. Middleton of the Royal Australian Air Force, flying with the Royal Air Force Squadron No. 149, and Flight Sergeant Arthur Aaron of No. 218 Squadron RAF. Both were awarded it posthumously, as Flight Sergeant Middleton went down with his aircraft after having to ditch in the English Channel due to low fuel, and Flight Sergeant Aaron, after landing safely, died hours after the mission due to his wounds. The final bomber variant was the Mk.III, powered by Hercules 6 or 16 engines. A new dorsal turret and some internal changes were also added. Production would peak at 80 aircraft a month in mid-1943, and at its peak, the Stirling equipped 13 squadrons. As Halifax and Lancaster numbers became sufficient with their greater performance, the Stirling started to be pulled from bombing duties and relegated to other duties. The last Bomber Command sortie occurred in September 1944 and was flown by No. 149 Squadron. Many Mk.IIIs were equipped with H-2S ground mapping radar in a Ballyra dome and were used with Bomber Command Pathfinder Force. It was also used in mine-laying missions. As of 1944, the Stirling's main role changed from that of a bomber to that of a glider tug and transport with RAF Transport Command. In 1943, 2 converted Mk.III prototypes, one as a tug and the other as a troop carrier, were flown, and this developed into the Mk.IV. The Mk.IV was virtually exactly the same as the Mk.III, apart from the glider tower in the rear fuselage and the removal of the nozzle and dorsal turrets. The Mk.IV entered service with No. 299 Squadron during January 1944, and its first missions were to drop supplies to resistance forces in northern France. The Mk.IV Stirling was used on D-Day to tow airspeed Horsa gliders to Normandy, and afterwards ferried fuel from England to the 2nd Tactical Air Force on the continent. The Stirling was also used in landings at Arnhem and in March 1945 during the crossing of the Rhine. Stirlings were also used with the Special Operations Executive to supply resistance fighters and as the electronic countermeasure aircraft. A small number were also allocated to training units. The final variant was the Mk.V, an unarmed transport version which took to the air for the first time in August 1944. It could carry 40 troops, 12 stretchers and 14-seater casualties, 2 jeeps with trailers, or a jeep with a field gun and a trailer and ammunition. The nose was lengthened and the front part could hinge open. There were large doors on the starboard rear side of the fuselage. It entered service with No. 46 Squadron in January 1945 and operations started in February. It undertook regular trips between the UK and the Middle East, Iraq and India and was intended for use in the Far East before the war came to an end. The Stirling finished service with the RAF in March 1946 with No. 46 Squadron converting to Avro Yorks. A total of 2,383 had been built, with it flying 18,440 sorties, dropping 27,821 tons of bombs and 20,000 mines. 769 Stirlings were lost. Post-war, its use as an airliner and freighter failed to materialise. Several did operate with the Belgian operator Transair from 1947 for numerous years, but that was all. Currently, there are no restored Stirlings in the world. However, a UK group, the Stirling Aircraft Project, are trying to rebuild a complete forward fuselage of a Stirling Mk.III. A link to their website can be found below. The Stirling was a very capable aircraft, and it was a requirement of the Air Ministry that severely hampered its ability. Before the war, and again in 1941, Short suggested a highly improved version of the Stirling, both containing an increased wingspan, but both times the Air Ministry turned it down. As Geoffrey Norris asserts, writing in profile publications The Short Stirling, quote, "Certainly the Stirling had its problems, but virtually all of them stemmed from the blinkered thinking of the Air Ministry," end quote. It is often overlooked, but the Short Stirling was an excellent aircraft critical to the success of the British during the Second World War.
Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure to go leave a like and subscribe for future videos. In the meantime, keep flying high.